Dan Joyce, welcome to Drop Balls and Big Calls.
Thanks for having me, mate. Excited to be here.
Yeah, pleasure. So this has been teed up through a mutual friend of ours, Sheena.
Absolutely,
Shout
it
out to
has.
Sheena. How are you feeling about today?
I think excitedly nervous. I think in the work that I do, I'm often speaking about or representing everyone else's story, and that's something I'm really passionate about. I think talking about your own is something maybe I don't do enough of, and I think there's power in that. So I've been excited about this, but yeah, just probably a little bit nervous as well. But I do think there's a cathartic nature in being able to talk about your story and share that with, the wider world as well. So yeah, no, I've been looking forward to the opportunity, mate.
Yeah, fantastic, Dan. Well, we're certainly looking forward to hearing more about you today. And for people that don't know you, Dan, how would you describe yourself? If someone was coming up to you at a barbecue and asked, "Who is Dan Joyce?" How would you describe yourself?
I think often at that barbecue, I'm the guy who represents all things youth work. Like I talk about childhood trauma, and I think they're often conversations that people don't really want to have at a barbecue, but they're passions of mine. So if people asked what I did, I would very much speak probably to my work, and that's been largely a huge passion of my life. I think in a nutshell, I'm someone who wants the world to be a better place. I want, particularly for kids, I want kids to have a decent crack at having a nice experience of the world that exists. And I think for many kids that isn't a reality. So I think probably that's in a nutshell who I am. I think, professionally, I'm a social worker. I'm very community spirited and love the work that I do. Outside of that, I'm a brother and I'm an uncle. I'm a foster carer. I'm a few things, I suppose. But I think when I really think about all the things that I like to do or that I'm passionate about, I think it all comes back to, just a fella who wants people to have a decent shot in the world and for the world to be a, nicer place for many, I suppose.
You've been doing this line of work for quite a while now. What inspired you to get into this line of work? I can imagine there's days that are really troubling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in prep for this interview, I was reflecting on my journey in terms of sort of what got me into it. And I remember after year 12, not having a whole lot of, I suppose, motivation or interest or drive, didn't really know what I wanted to do, a bit aimless in life. And I received a call from the principal I had at school. And he said to me, did I want a year's work as an integration aide at my local high school, so the high school that I went to school at. And I suppose more so just for money. I said, yeah, absolutely, because I had no job and just needed some level of routine. And I think through that role in my local community in Wonthaggi, where I grew up, I probably started to encounter a world I didn't know existed. Part of my role was to come in and support some of the kids who had been maybe considered naughty or trouble or problematic in the school setting. But very quickly, as I started to work with those kids and support their connection to education, I realized that a strong theme that they all kind of shared was that their home life was pretty terrible. And I think that started to sort of open up the world of, for me, child protection and out-of-home care and just childhood trauma in general. And I suppose the experiences that many kids face, but we don't maybe know a whole lot about or talk about often. So it kind of sparked interest. And from there, I segued into out-of-home care, so working in residential care, which largely kind of defines most of my career. Largely my career has been working with kids in care. So that was kind of the initial segue into the work. I think maybe as well, growing up, I look at some of my own experiences that I had and probably didn't think about this at the time in terms of what stepped me into social work, but probably when I look at, the difficulties and adversity that I, faced myself growing up, I think probably those parts played a role in, joining the profession that I am in now and really enjoy, but probably didn't connect those dots initially. I think, when I look back now, I think those dots well and truly connect, but not as much, at the time. It was very much, I needed a job, I needed money. And then I think from that sparked a pretty deep interest in people's lives and kids' lives, and wanting, to advocate for people who are having a really rough time.
Yeah. I think even though you said that, largely at the time it was about, money and finding a line of work that
Yeah,
mattered to
yeah.
you, there was obviously something underlying that made you want to support people in need. Maybe take us back to your childhood. You grew up in Wonthaggi, from what I understand. What was Wonthaggi like as a kid?
I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a Bunthaggi as a location. It's by the coast. It's near a beach. Like, it's a pretty nice part of the world. I think probably didn't appreciate it as much when I was growing up there versus now when I visit. I like it a lot more. Um, I I think as a regional town, um, I think for me as a queer person, I grew up where, I am gay, but very closeted and in a space where, you don't kind of see yourself exist in the world. You very much felt, well, I very much felt alone. So I think navigating maybe some of my own identity stuff throughout my teenage years in particular, whilst in an area that just probably didn't feel as though I fit in a whole lot, was difficult. I think I had a lot of great experiences regionally. I think growing up in the country and kind of that sort of community atmosphere that you kind of get to experience and enjoy and be part of. Um, but I think for me, particularly during my teenage years, I wrestled with a whole lot of identity stuff that maybe living in that area didn't always help contribute a whole lot of good to, if that makes sense. It was kind of a wrestle within myself, liking where I lived, but trying to navigate life as someone who didn't fit into where he lived, or didn't feel like he fit into where he lived.
Yeah. At what age did you sort of realize that you were gay, and what did being closeted as a kid do to you and your nervous system?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. I think it's a question, particularly in terms of when did I realize that, um, you often get asked. And I think my answer to that is, I always knew. Like, it's something I always knew. I think when people are figuring out themselves, it's something that I just knew as part of who I was. I think the difficulty with it is I didn't feel, or I couldn't be transparent about it. Like, it was a secret that I held. It was a secret that I kept. And I think that uh, was often very, it just felt tumultuous within. It was like living in turmoil while presenting a particular face to the world. Um, I, and I think as well, going through your adolescent period, particularly high school, where, you are, I think, you know, how you are perceived to others seems to matter a whole lot, as a kid. I think for me, I had to play the part of someone I wasn't for a long time. I think I played that part really well, and I think that in and of itself didn't help, with a healthy nervous system in the long run, because you are really putting a whole lot of energy into presenting a particular face to the world that isn't authentic. It's not genuine, and probably in lots of ways wasn't fair to me. So, in terms of being fair to myself, but I felt very stuck. I felt very trapped in myself, and um, you know, I think when I reflect back now and I look at kind of what was contributed to maybe being a huge struggle of that time as well, was just lack of visibility, feeling like, you are on your own and you are the only person who feels like this. And because you start to sort of think like that and feel like this, it almost felt very wrong. And I felt like a, puzzle piece that didn't fit. Yeah, very, very difficult. Very, uh, you know, it's almost like self-torture in lots of ways. You kind of just speaking very ill to yourself, or thinking very ill about yourself, and trying to, you know, change who you are, knowing that you can't. It was, the thought processes as a kid were tough. And you're doing all that whilst trying to navigate just your general life as a teenager, and the pressures of school and the pressures of, peer dynamics and all those other things. So I think, Yeah, it felt very compounding, and it also just felt very, very alone, like trying to navigate something um, very much solo without ever thinking as though I'd be able to kind of get any support or tell anyone. Very, very isolating.
Yeah, it sounds really tough, mate. You speak with a lot of clarity about that time. It sounds like you've really done a lot of work on those years. Looking back now, what do you wish someone had said to the younger version of you?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, and I think I thought about this a little while back. I found a photo of myself at a younger age, and when I was going through some stuff at home, and I don't know, I'm a pretty reflective fella, and I like to sort of think back and then sort of get a sense as how far I've come. Maybe I think back then, very simply, it would have been nice to hear the words "it's going to be okay." I think because for lots of for many years, and probably throughout my entire teenage period, didn't think it would probably be okay. And I struggled to maybe imagine a life or a world with me in it. And I think that there's some dark times that you progress through as an isolated, closeted gay teen. You don't see yourself anywhere, and therefore you don't feel like you belong anywhere. And I think with that it did carry, some pretty negative thoughts at times. So I think when I look back now, it very much it'll be okay, because I think that kind of paves way to there being light at the end of the tunnel. And for many parts of my adolescence, I probably didn't feel like there was a whole light towards the end of that tunnel. It often felt very dark, even though, from an exterior point of view, many wouldn't have been none the wiser that, I was having this sort of, outrageous internal battle.
Yeah. So, and school's tough at the best of times. Hey, like when
Yeah,
you're particularly secondary still, like you said before, there's so many different facets to it and different pressures, like you mentioned. But it's really hard to see beyond that. Like it feels like at the time, it feels like everything because it's all you know, right? You don't have a lot of
absolutely.
those external pressures. You haven't been out to the workplace or anything like that. You don't know what's ahead, really. It just feels
Correct.
like
Yeah,
that is everything.
absolutely.
Yeah. You once said, Dan, that resilience is about remaining soft in a world that gives you plenty of reasons to harden. When did you, I guess, realize that you were starting to harden in many ways? What does that statement mean to you now?
What does it mean to me now? I think, I look at that statement probably through the lens of my work. I've worked with many kids who have had really rough trots in their very early years and have not been afforded, sometimes just that those basic needs of safety and feeling like, they can be within their own world for whatever reason. Um, so I think from the context of my work, I see kids having to navigate some really arduous, horrible times and still being. And I think that is, from me, it comes with a whole lot of respect because I think to get up every day and face the battles that you do can be really, really draining. It can be tough. When I look at that from the perspective of myself, I think, I towards the end of my sort of, when I was 16, 17, I felt very isolated, very, negative, and struggled to kind of contemplate, existence beyond adolescence in terms of like, how would I authentically live, and didn't see the possibility of that. Um, and I sometimes look at the world around me, or, back then, looked at the world around me, which didn't feel as though I belonged. I think as I progress through, I suppose, that concept of remaining soft in a pretty rough world, I think I look at those experiences, but also the experiences of the kids that I've supported and worked with. And whilst there can be some pretty dark days and pretty difficult times, it's trying to, remain together as best you can to try and progress to that light, because it does exist. Sometimes you've got to dig for it, but it's there, and trying to create, a life that feels good within a world that sometimes doesn't.
Yeah. What has working with kids who've experienced trauma taught you about empathy and about yourself?
I think, yeah, no. Really good question. I think um, when I first started, it was kind of an experience of not knowing maybe lots of, I suppose in that child protection domain and in the out of home care domain, not knowing that these, parts of the world existed. So learning that and then getting a sense of how kids are not only having to navigate, you know, childhood trauma, but, the difficulties of living within a system as well. Um, yeah, I felt probably, I think a whole lot of respect, particularly to the kids that I've met and worked with and walked alongside, because they've had to endure some pretty terrible times, but still keep on keeping on. And I think um, that's, it's really harnessed a lot of my compassion and my empathy for the world and wanting to be part of the greater good and trying to, it's not necessarily about fixing people or trying to be part of the fix, but walking alongside and helping people pave their own path. Um, and I think in lots of ways, when I have supported kids over the years, I've seen parts of myself in the work that I do, knowing that I've had my own battles, my own demons, my own difficulties. And then the work that I have done internally to try and pave a decent path ahead, I've seen in others as well. So I think there's almost a validating nature to the work that I've done in terms of the experiences that I've had as well, albeit different, but just similar paths of trying to untangle some pretty difficult times within ourselves.
One of the biggest observations that I've had of people working in the sector that you're in, or any care related sector, is um, maintaining professional boundaries and trying not to take, or not taking that work home with you, which can be incredibly difficult. I guess you do, if you care about these people a lot, it must be difficult at times to I guess maintain some of those boundaries and not take that home with you. How do you hold space for others that are experiencing trauma and pain that you're caring for without losing yourself in it?
I think if I am honest in that answer, I think in my career, I think there's been times where I have taken it home and I think it's taken a toll. And I think working with people who are having a really difficult time, um, it's beyond a 9 to 5 job. It's very much something that remains with you because you're working with people's lives. So
Yeah.
I think in lots of ways over the course of my career, and I've worked in this space now for 15 years, there's been periods of time where it's been difficult to not take that home. I think you are working with, you're at the coalface of people having a really terrible time, and then you go home and, you know, it's hard to, I think with what you see in the day, it's hard to unsee at night, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's been periods of time where I've struggled to maybe maintain that self-care in terms of preserving self to be able to do, to remain doing the work that I do. I think through that though, I've also experienced burnout and the reality of that. So I think, um, you learn as you go. You do your best as you know. And I think for me, like I've really tried to, I think I really, probably something I tell myself now is I've got to be my best self to be able to remain in it. And I think in recent times, after experiencing some pretty significant burnout, it was kind of a time for me to really reflect in a really significant way, and decide how to step out to be able to step back in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%. Before we get to the burnout stuff, Dan, I want to rewind a little bit again, because at a very young age, at the age of 23, you made quite a significant decision to become a foster carer, which that's massive for someone in their early 20s. It's massive for anyone, to take on something
Absolutely,
like that.
it's a huge thing.
What drew you to it at that particular age?
I think I describe this as a very heart over head decision. I'm 23 and still learning my own world, still learning the world. And I was working in the space of residential care. I was working with a young fella who I'd built a really good connection with. And it kind of just naturally grew from this, probably the social injustice within me. You know, there was this young fella who I think could do really well in the world, who was living in a group care setting, and there seemed to be no one outside of the system that could care for him, which I thought was terrible. I'm like, this is a terrible thing. Um, so I suppose very much, you know, for me, it was, I hadn't thought of foster care prior to that, but I did think about, you know, how do I care for this young fella? How do I be part of, like, you know, him not, you know, having to live in residential care? Most people I spoke about, you know, I was, oh, you know, I'm thinking about doing foster care. Should I do it? And, you know, largely it was like, no, you shouldn't, like, you're 23. And I'm like, I feel like at that point in time, you know, you're 23, you're told no. I'm a bit of a dog with a bone. Like, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to do it even more. um, I'd spoken to my mum, and my mum was cautious and supportive. You know, for me, she wanted me to be okay to do it, and to feel that I could do it. She's an incredibly supportive person, you know, in my life. And so from that, it kind of paved the path of, you know, I went and got accredited as a foster carer. And then I think that process made it, you know, 3-4 months. And then shortly after that, that young fella, whose name's Sean, and I speak about him a fair bit, and he gives me permission to speak about him. He was asked if he wanted to come and reside with me, and he was 14 at the time. He jumped for joy at that. He thought it was a cool thing. And yeah, from that point, I was still living at home with my mum. So I'd moved out of home, got my own place, and became a foster carer. And it's one of the biggest decisions I've ever made, but probably the single best decision I've ever made as well. Something I'm really proud of. And he's someone who is very much a part of my life, and myself, he's, you know, still.
Well, that's amazing, man. That's such a cool story. And yeah, I mean, it was clear you already had a lot of maturity at that point anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's clear you have a big heart. It sounds like it worked out really well. How long did he live with you for?
He lived with me until he was 21, 22.
Sure.
And since that, yeah, so it was beyond like the foster care years. He remained with me. Finished his apprenticeship as a painter, got very fatigued from painting, and now he's doing support work with people living with a disability, doing really well.
Amazing.
Yeah, doing some great stuff. He is with his partner. They've bought a house together. They've had 2 kids in the last 2 years, which is awesome. So I think he's 27 now. We're very close. You know, we chat most days. I visit him, he visits me. We live 15 minutes apart. And it does feel really special to be part of his world, because it's like it's a, I suppose when you look at foster care, often, you know, there's this sometimes misconception that it ends at 18. And I think, well, maybe the formal aspect does, but, you know, care and relationships continue. And I think for me, that's been something I've been really able to remain part of, which is, it's a nice thing. It's a cool thing. And seeing him be able to be a parent now, and him parent his own kids, and being a part of just their family dynamic, it's, like it warms my heart. And it's something probably that I'm, you know, very, very proud to be part of. It does feel like an absolute privilege.
Absolutely. And how did that decision to go into foster care change your understanding of care and responsibility?
In a really big way. I think, you know, I was living at home still. Like I was professionally working in the space of care and responsibility, but, you know, outside of that, I was a 23-year-old. So I think to step into that, which is very much a decision I made and was super eager for, but maybe didn't understand what it would look like once it became a reality. So just, I think, it probably, I think, took some time to really grasp, in terms of, you know, like I felt like I became an instant parent, a parent overnight really quickly, of a young fella, and trying to navigate that, plus, you know, my work, and also trying to just make the realities of life work a little bit, finding a bit of balance. And sometimes there was some balance, and sometimes there wasn't. But I think Sean and I very much, it was a team dynamic, and we made something complex work well together. Um, yeah, I think it taught me a lot of it really refined a lot of maybe the traits that I would describe as, um, you know, big within me now in terms of patience, in terms of, just being okay with things going a bit pear shaped, and then sort of, you know, getting back on the path when we needed to. Like it's, yeah, being okay with error and being part of, being okay with fixing things as you needed to. So um, it was a very different way of growing up, I suppose, in my 20s, but it's a way that I have zero regrets with and would do it again. Because I think not only did it teach me a lot about myself, it's given me this opportunity to be part of this young fella's life, still. So yeah, I really reflect on it positively. I think it's something that um, means a whole lot to me.
I can imagine there was some really challenging moments along the way there. I mean, obviously he was in his teenage years at that point. I can imagine there was some hairy moments there. Was there any particular moment that you felt like was I guess, a crossroads? And obviously tell me if there's something you can't talk about.
No, no, so far, yeah, yeah. Um, not necessarily a crossroads moment, but I think one thing I know about kids in care, once they start to feel stable and like an environment is going to be there for the long haul, they can start to feel that can feel unsafe in and of itself. So navigating, I suppose, some of those moments where he, once children feel safe, settle, you start to see a few behaviors. More so it was, and in reflection, weren't huge behaviors, but I think I was 23, 24, and it's like trying to navigate these things as someone who works in it, but definitely wasn't living through it prior. Sometimes it was the school ringing, and it's like, oh, he's done this or he's done that. You need to come over here. And I'm trying to balance work with the responsibilities of being a parent of someone who's in high school. I also think, there was times where he was unpacking his own stuff, his own trauma, and untangling his own difficulties from his own experiences, and supporting him through that. Obviously, something that I really wanted to be part of. But, I think when you're confronted with trauma-based presentation in your own home, it can be tough. It can be, confronting to some degree. But I think he and I had a really decent relationship. It just continued to get better. And I think as a result, I think he felt safe within that. And I think he was able to, find a path that was decent to walk on. And he did. And he's a really accomplished individual now and has sort of created a life for him that he's really proud of. And, he does really well.
Yeah, amazing. What do you think people often misunderstand about foster care or young people in the system in general? I imagine there's a lot of misconceptions out there.
I think so. I get a sense with foster care that it's, I think teenagers in particular, there's a fear attached to them. People are a little bit unsure about teenagers, and I think maybe in the ways in which they're represented in the media, that's not helpful either.
Yeah.
I think there can be often this connotation of teenagers doing, outrageous, terrible things. But in the end of the day, I think I see those kids as very hurt children with no safe place to live or be. And I think as a result, you always see those presentations continue to exist and manifest because they haven't got a place to call home. And if they do, often it's not a very good one. So I think foster care rates in recent times have been declining. So the more people that become a foster care each year, there's more that leave the system, which I think is a tough reality because there's no shortage of kids needing it. I think for me, I was very passionate about my work in general. I'm very passionate about working with adolescents because I feel like they are a cohort of kids or young people that people seem to maybe not understand, where I've been really eager to understand, the evolving nature of adolescence and how you support kids, particularly who are navigating trauma. But I think it's I think the fear attached to teenagers is a little bit of a misconception for me, because I know they can be represented in particular ways, and at times their behaviours can really resemble things that, as a community, we might go, that's tough to see or to experience. I think for me, I suppose through my experiences, it's those kids, despite the behavior, often feel petrified inside,
Mm,
and you know are residing in sometimes some of the most unsafest circumstances. So, marrying those two together, I think we don't often do as a community or as a society, but I think it's important to do that, because I think without that deep understanding of teenagers and adolescents, they will remain often in a system without the care that they need or deserve.
yeah. Oh man, I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to, I guess in many ways, lose your family and just be out in the
Yeah,
unknown. And for some, they'd be moving from house to house. As you mentioned, there's a lot of people getting out of foster
absolutely.
care, and there's a dire need for people to do it. It must be terrifying for them, let alone the trauma that they might have experienced earlier in life, but just that alone, that fear of the unknown, yeah, it can't be nice.
Absolutely. No, I think often kids come into care with the experience of trauma, within the context of family and at home. And then they're asked to navigate a system that maybe isn't always built as best as it can be. And I think we know that in order for kids to feel safe, they need stability,
Yeah,
physically by way of a house, and also relationally. I think when you're not afforded that, and when you're sort of moving from foster care home to foster care home, or from residential care home to residential care home, um, I think that it doesn't, it doesn't afford stability. And I think kids, as a result, we start to see bigger presentations because of that. I think it's often trauma based presentation. It's symptom of their experiences. And I think if we're not giving kids that stability and that safety that they like need for their growth and their healing, then we're going to always see that perpetual cycle of um, confronting presentation that's often depicted in the media.
absolutely. Yeah, you'd just be in fight or flight mode all the time, wouldn't you?
As always, yeah.
Let's say there's a family out there right now that's considering doing foster care. And, I'm lucky enough to know a couple of families that do it, and they're wonderful people. Their
Mhm.
kids grew up and they had a home available to them, and they wanted to help others. What would your advice be to someone that's contemplating the same path?
Go through the process and just get a sense of if it's for you. I think often with foster care, when people start to discuss it, you're often very quickly met with the why nots, as opposed to the why to do it. Um, I think it opens yourself up to a world that maybe you didn't know existed, but very much you're needed in. I think the kids that we have in care, there's many of them, and so many don't have homes that need it. And I think, we'll often hear around, these are the negative aspects of foster care, or these are the reasons why we shouldn't do it, or these are the things that foster carers may or may not be supported with. And I'm not dismissing that the system's got difficulties; it absolutely does. And I think, foster care needs a whole lot of investment, from a government point of view. But at the end of the day, whilst those discussions simultaneously occur, these kids need care very much. I encourage people to, if they're thinking about it, even just start that conversation with a foster care provider, talk about it. And if they've got hesitations and concerns, speak about those as well. Like, just have some really, upfront, authentic conversations around thoughts, feelings, reservations, hesitations, the things that the passions that lead you to wanting to think about it. Because ultimately, I think if you've got a home that you can open up to a young person, and also a heart that you can open up to a young person, very much do so, because those kids are not just needing it, but often craving it. So, yeah, I don't want to pretend that it's a system that works well. I think there's lots of inadequacies in it. But at the end of the day, system, the kids aren't responsible for those inadequacies, and those kids still need that care. And it's how do we continue to keep that, journey going for those kids and carers, whilst also trying to maybe, fix the problems of the foster care realm as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dan, you mentioned earlier, obviously you've been in social services for a good 15 years now. You mentioned burnout. You're obviously coming off the back of a pretty difficult year in terms of experiencing burnout. What did burnout look like for you? When did you recognize that that was what you were experiencing?
Yeah, sure. I think when I look at my burnout journey, which has probably been one of the biggest hurdles I've had to face over the last 18 months, 2 years. I suppose that I made the decision in June 2024 to step away from full-time work. I'd been in leadership positions and I'd been in really high demand roles for a long time in terms of the workload attached to it. And I got to a point in June 2024 where I think after maybe 6 months of really pondering um, how to how to st- how to start to recover from what I felt was significant burnout. And I'd googled burnout and I'd done those little checklists and I tick these little boxes, and I very much felt burnout. And I suppose the responses that I got from my little Google reviews online was very much that I was experiencing it. I really needed to step away from the work that I was doing for a period of time, to be able to over time, step back in. And I think probably in early June 2024, I remember, I'd be sitting at work, and from a health point of view, I didn't feel good. I felt very empty-minded. I felt very much as though the world was passing by and I really wasn't a whole lot part of it. Struggled to pull together a thought, just a very dulled version of my previous self, I felt. Um, from a health point of view, I was going to work, I was doing work, I was going home, and then I'd just kind of be sleeping or just sort of doing not a whole lot outside of that. I think, I started to become um, just a very bland version of my former self. And I think, previously I was someone who was very eager to be part of, all the social events or go and do things on the weekends. Like kind of, I lived a pretty impulsive life where I think I'd stumbled into this um, experience of monotony. Maybe I think my life became very, really monotonous. Um, yeah, like I pulled the pin, and that was petrifying to actually say I'm going to resign from full-time work. And at that point, step into no job, just take a break and kind of just figure out what it'll be. And um, I think making that decision took many months because, I think in life, you're taught that, full-time work is the way to be, and that's, we've got to work full-time, and you get your Saturday and your Sunday off, and that's your time for you. And I think to kind of flip that on its head and um, step into kind of the unknown, I found quite overwhelming initially, but very quickly, once leaving work and stepping into kind of just this, not having to set alarms in the morning or not having to have, my work phone ringing all throughout the day and night, or no Teams notifications in the day. Like I think starting to realize a life without that for a little bit felt good, and it gave me time. And I think, which is the biggest thing, it gave me time to start working on a few, personal goals that I'd had, but I felt like I didn't have the time to achieve those things, getting my health and weight under control. I felt like I had let myself go in lots of ways because my life was not active. It was one of going to work, sitting in an office and then leaving, and then, being tired at home. So yeah, I think it gave me, it was quite liberating in lots of ways, but felt very scary as well. But I was able to start to pull together a life where I could, I was out in the sun more. I was, going to the gym more, planning trips, overseas a little bit more, and seeing people in my life that were important to me, but just wasn't often seeing. My mum, for example, we speak every day, but I just wasn't seeing her because, I had no time in the day. And I think in lots of ways, maybe I feared regret, had this mid-30s kind of, I won't call it a crisis, but this kind of just this thought process of, you're going to get, of an age one day, and you're going to look back and be happy with the things that you achieved personally. And I wasn't
Mm.
sure that I was at that point. I felt like I was just kind of existing in a world that, and I wasn't doing a whole lot within. So yeah, I think stepping out of that was a pretty brave call. Um, and also, when I look back now, 18 months later, I've, you know, much more back to, the fellow that I was previous, and got that spark back and that drive, and, really, that passion within me again. Um, it's gone, it's been a journey. It's been, it's a tough journey initially, because I think acknowledging burnout, there's a little bit of a shame attached to it. But I think, or I felt there was a little bit of shame attached to it. But since then, I've been able to really normalize the experience and, make active steps to recover. Something I'm really proud of.
Yeah, you should be. You're right. It does feel like there's a little bit of shame to it in many ways. Like I've been on a similar journey in recent times, but the
Yeah.
I remember like listening to I was listening to a podcast. It was a Diary of a CEO episode. I forget the guest's name. It's actually doing rounds on social media. She was basically just saying, there's no such thing as burnout. You're just living your life wrong. Basically, was the crux of the conversation. You're not working hard enough. And I just remember being like so angry about it. I thought it was actually, when I was going through a lot of the stuff last year, I thought there was something wrong with me. And my response to
Yeah.
feeling like feeling fatigued all the time, not losing weight, which by the way is a symptom of stress and burnout, is weight retention.
Absolutely.
Um, and
100%.
no
Yeah.
matter how
Yeah.
little you eat or how much you exercise, like, for me,
Those
I
cortisol
just threw
levels.
myself
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
running marathons, running 60 to 80 Ks a week, and
Yeah. Yeah.
working full time, raising a toddler, fiance, and podcast, filling my life with just stuff, and trying to work harder and
Yeah.
find ways out of it. And it doesn't work that way. And just hearing people talk like that, made me feel, and I'm sure you as well, just made you feel like there was something wrong with it. And then that shame element of like, well, this is what we are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be working hard, working full time, climbing the corporate ladder, buying a house, going into a lifetime of debt, buying that flash car, whatever it may be. Like, to me, it's just all a
Mm-hmm.
fucking lie, Dan. But
100%.
for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
touches aren't really important there. It's actually, I think the most important. Well, there's two. To me, there's two of the most important commodities in life is time and freedom.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the two most important things. I don't know if you found the same. Was there a turning point from your perspective where you felt that healing journey had begun?
Yeah. I think everything you've just, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And I think time for me equaled freedom, because I felt like I had no time, like zero time. And I was so built into this work world, which I loved. Like, I actually did like my work, but it became my whole identity. And if you had to ask me at that point, who am I? How would I describe myself? It would just very much be through my work. There was a single lens kind of self-description, which is pretty terrible. Because, I think liking your work is one thing, and also liking your own life is, an important balance. And I didn't have that. So I think for me, being able to get, I went from having no time to all the time. And then I was kind of able to, it was almost like putting a bit of a puzzle back together. It's like, well, how do you want to rebuild this? Like, you've kind of blown it up. You've blown your life up in a really big way. How do you want to redesign it in a way that feels good? I think sort of that healing and recovery for me, it was being like my young fella, Sean, he was having kids, and being able to be part of that, and, visiting the hospital, when they'd had their baby, and going over to their house, and, just being a part of those things, like those new beginnings, which is a cool thing. Being able to plan trips abroad and not have to sort of think about, what's happening at work, or not being on leave, but still checking your email, or still checking your team. Like, I just had none none of that anymore. And they're boundaries that I was responsible for. But I think in social work, it's hard to not be interested and invested because, they are people's lives and you're very much responsible, for how we're supporting those people. Yeah, I think for me, it was just very much around, I learnt this term very quickly after sort of pulling the pin on full-time work called glimmers. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. It's I found it on LinkedIn, and it's a term that it's the opposite of triggers. So it's like the micro moments of happiness, micro moments of things that make you feel good. And I tried to really build that into my life. It was, in the morning, the routine of going to grab a coffee or going to, for a walk, or just little things that weren't huge or, you know, monumental in nature, but they just made you feel good. So I suppose that for me, I was trying to fill my life with, many glimmers of all the things that I know that I like to do, or the things that make me feel good. Um, and then I suppose make, some really define some personal goals and work out sort of where I wanted to head. Some of that's been, traveling abroad. Like, I really wanted to travel a bit and maybe felt like I couldn't beforehand, not as much anyway. This year I've traveled, I went to Vietnam in March, which is really cool, for 3 weeks. And then in June, I went to the USA with my mum, which is a cool thing as well. So I think just very much, I think, you described it really well, time and freedom. I think for me, they equaled each other, and being able to have more time meant more freedom. It's allowed me opportunity to just redesign how I want to live my life. I think, at one point, I'm doing some casual work at the moment now, but at one point, I will go back into a role, but I'm not sure that I ever want it to be 5 days a week again. I'm not sure that that's something that, I want to feature in my world for the rest of my working career, because I think, there's a whole world out there. There's a whole lot to live. And I think if you haven't got the time, it's hard to do the things you want to do. In recent times, health has been a really important part of my journey. Since June 2024 to today, I've lost 34 kilos, which it's
Well
crazy.
done, mate.
It's crazy to me. And I kind of look at that as I look at that as kind of the weight that I carried sort of emotionally, but very much obviously physical. I look at my journey of recovery, not through, I suppose, a lens of weight loss, but more so I've had the time to allow for these, to work toward these personal goals. And one of them's been, improving health and weight loss. One of them's been travel, and the other one's been spending time with people, who are in my circle. And I think I'm doing those things much more now. So I think recovery looks like that. And then for me, it's very much around being empowered to go back into, maybe contracted work in a way that works for me, as opposed to just feeling like you got to go back into this full onslaught of 5 days a week again. I don't think that, I've really challenged that thinking, and I like that I kind of see that differently.
Mm. Yeah, I think a couple of important distinctions there that you mentioned yourself as well. Of like, we're not blaming our workplaces for the stuff either. Like, there's certainly elements of individual responsibility in terms of protecting yourself from burnout, and I think we've both learned
Yeah,
from that. Um, I think, a lot of
for
workplaces as
sure.
well are starting to challenge that thinking of, that 5 days a week full time. There's certainly that movement of 4-day work weeks going around, but we're coming into an interesting time in the world as well, in terms of like what technology and what the gig economy and everything like that is building into our lives, and being able to choose when we want to work, how we work. Um, I think that's only going to be
Absolutely.
a good thing in the near term. What it looks like longer term, I don't know. I think everything's going to change quite dramatically, but I think you've got a lot more
Mhm.
choice these days, and I think that's for the better. But there's certainly an element of individual responsibility to take that how you want, and like you said, life by your own design as well. I think people really need more. Certainly, my advice to people. I don't know what yours would
Mhm.
be, Dan, but my advice to people would be to, if you are experiencing this and you do step away from your workplace, like, use that time to really think about how you want your life to look. Focus on the things that you really enjoy, what gives you those moments of happiness and joy throughout your day, and build that into your life going forward. But think about how you want your life to look longer term as well, and it gives you a bit of a north star to work towards, right?
100%. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, mate. And I think for me, and I really did think deeply about this. I feared regret. I feared getting
Yeah.
older and then looking back and going, you didn't do the things you wanted to do. And I'm happy that I realized that at, 33, 34, I'm 35 now, and I'm happy that that thinking started then, because I felt very stuck within my work. So without making those big, brave decisions to kind of step out of it, which was difficult initially, I'm happy that those thoughts were kind of, you know, notions that I was pondering, because it's allowed me to go on the path of, like we've said, redesigning what our life looks like in order to kind of, you know, reap the benefits of the world we live. So, I think, yeah, fear and regret, played a huge role in, I suppose, encouraging me to, contemplate how things change now.
Yeah. Was there a single moment that was for you? Like for me, it was, looking at my daughter turned 3 in December and just thinking, fuck, like I don't know where that time's gone. I've barely done a drop off and pick up to
Mm,
daycare at that time.
yeah,
Like just to me that
yeah.
3 years of my life had just disappeared, and I didn't know where it had gone, and I was part of me really was resentful of that. Was there a particular moment for you that really stood out?
A moment that stood out for me, I think it was, um, yeah, having missed opportunities. And I think when my young fella Sean was, he'd had his first daughter and then his second, and I, particularly with when he had his first daughter, I really wanted to be part of that. I think that was a cool thing to be part of. I was very excited for him, and it was all, it was a nice time. But I would finish work and get to his house to visit, and um, his little baby Mila would be in bed, and I'd already miss out on these things. I'm like, I'm missing out on a lot because I'm just not around and not present. And I'm very professionally, I'm so present. Personally, where am I? Like, I'm nowhere. So I think it was those moments that I realized that, when, if you don't change things now, those missed opportunities you'll never get back. And I didn't want to, get a bit of FOMO. I don't want to miss out. And I wanted to be part of the nice things that were happening in my life that I felt maybe distracted by my work. So yeah, I think there's some real moments that stood out. I think was very much not wanting to miss out on good things happening because of a really, unhealthy work routine.
What's next for you personally or professionally, Dan? What excites you the most going forward?
I suppose at the moment, I'm really keen to continue on sort of progressing through some of the personal ambitions that I've had. I think travel is one of them. I've really wanted to try and get out and explore the world. My foster lad and his family and myself, we're all going to Bali in a couple of weeks, which is a really cool thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. In 2 weeks this Saturday we're going, which is pretty exciting. And I think following that, I think solo travel has been something I've wanted to, get amongst for a little while. I've probably lacked the confidence to get amongst it, but I think it's, this year's the year, and booking a trip a little later this year to go and do some stuff solo. And yeah, I think travel is a really big thing that I'm wanting to explore. I think outside of that, just really continuing to look at how do I maintain balance in my life. I think, I can be a pretty impulsive person. I get very excited about, different things very quickly. And how do you kind of always come back to making sure you've got balance so you're not sort of recreating that cycle of burnout? I probably don't want to encounter that again. I'm really keen to keep filling my life with the things that make me feel good, but also, having that, striking that balance with work that allows you to still do the things you are really passionate about doing. And for me, that's working, with young people who have experienced trauma, as well as maintaining a boundary that allows you to have a life that is healthy and feels good, and is full of opportunity, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Hey, Dan, thank you so much for your time today, mate. It's been great listening to your story, and you communicate so well with such clarity. And I'm glad that the journey you've been on has been a really positive one, and you found peace and joy in your life again, and your health as well. It's great, and yeah, just really appreciate your time, mate. And I think people get a lot of value out of today.
No, likewise, mate, and thanks for the opportunity to share my story here. I appreciated it.